Hello everyone and welcome back to Fleet's Catchup Ramblings. Yes, we're back again, catching up. Ought to be a nice short one today. Which is nice, as I've had a bit of an off-kilter day today, so might not be otherwise functioning at what might be considered there I was in the background there. My best. So yeah. Since we'll work through the questions as and well we as and as and where we can, and hopefully once we've done that, we can wrap things up with a nice little bow, and all will be well. At least therein lies the thinking. So, without further ado, oh, it's gone right back up to the top. Okay, so yeah, we did that. So yep, here we are. So we got 2 unanswered questions there. And then... oh, wow, Monday was not that long in terms of questions. Well... so, let's see. People on YouTube. Yep, Timo is there. Knight is there. Ah, well, good for you, Knight. I hope you're enjoying yourself. And congrats on the new laptop. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Discord question. What would be the likely reactions from the US and the USSR if the UK managed to get the green cheese radar-guided anti-ship missile into service that cancelled the project in 1956? It was based on the TV-guided glide bomb Blue Boar, both equipped with thermonuclear warheads of 10 to 12 kilotons. To be perfectly honest... they don't really react, honestly. There is no real reaction. It's not the sort of thing that causes an opponent to react. It's not really that big of a deal, if we're going to be at all honest. That's really the long and short. It's not really that big of a deal. What is the panel? In this case, just me. Favorite capital ship from Halo. Ships from Sins of the Prophets do count. I'm sorry, but it's got to be the Covenant supercarriers. They're just iconic. Like whatever size they're coming in, whatever level of run through the printer they are, that's just basically the that's my answer. They are just iconic. Next question. The panel's opinion on Pipkin Pippa and her collab with the USS Hornet Museum for CarrierCon. I have no idea who that is. And this is a Discord question, by the way. I haven't the foggiest who Pipkin Pippa is. If you want my absolute honest answer, that is the first time I have ever heard that name. Never heard of her. Oh, she's a VTuber. Well, I guess she's done a collab with Hornet. So, sure. Why not? There's nothing wrong with that. Discord asks, and this is a question from Ruinon because, well, well, what else could it be? How many potatoes and of what type and quality would be needed to replace or exceed my foreman? Just get like 2 sacks of Jackie potatoes and you're basically done. It'd have more intelligence, more clout, and more weight than your pathetic excuse of a human being that is your foreman. Discord question. What is each member of the panel's favourite American admiral during the Great War II Electric Boogaloo? Honestly, it's hard to go with anyone other than Nimitz. Cool, collected, knew when to take risks, knew when not to, was completely results focused rather than getting involved in petty politicking. Just all round a decent guy. Sidious, it's Friday. You know we don't take new questions on a Friday. This will probably be a very short one. Discord question. What if the IJN got their hands on nuclear weapons, which are small enough to be used on dive bombers or as the warhead of torpedoes, before December 7th, 1941? Well, first of all, a nuclear weapon that you drop from a dive bomber is a weapon of last... They cannot safely deliver that ordnance. There is a reason why, in the era of dumb atomic bombs delivered by aircraft tactically, most weapons are toss-bombed. Because it is the only way to survive the blast. Although it is Imperial Japan, so kamikazing a bunch of dive bombers into Pearl Harbor with atomic weapons would be one way to put that port out of action forever. As for the torpedoes, yeah, you could deploy submarines. You could deploy submarines with them, but aircraft delivering them is just suicidal. Foxo, you can't hear. I can't hear a word you're saying, Chief. But yes, I know, Foxo. I'm aware. I have seen what you have said. Hopefully you're enjoying yourself and making merry on a very lovely Friday that it is. Basically, that's the fundamental thing. The correct use of them will actually be to deliver raids against targets by bomber aircraft. And even then, you're going to be really, really thinking about how you're going to do that. But that is a war-winning weapon. If used correctly, that's a war-winning weapon. Politely. And they will just glass China in order to make sure they win. Like, central China away from the coast will just get glassed. Nuclear carpet bombing. Basically. YouTube question. As the RAF and the RN have F-35Bs, doesn't that mean that the RAF have an incentive to keep the RN carriers around? This question has been asked before, and as myself and Dr. Clark have said, yes. Dr. Clark literally mentioned that was one of the reasons why they were gone with in his video on the Queen Elizabeth class battleships. YouTube. People often say that the Yamato was a ship built for the wrong war. So say Germany was given both the infrastructure and resources to use Yamato. How will World War I go? She's only one ship. She's admittedly one out of context problem for the RN, given that if she's leading the first scouting group, which she will be given her speed, that is fundamentally that's the death of the British battlecruisers. She will just work them over one after a time. One at a time until they're all dead. and then she'll return to port. She can sortie basically solo with some fast escorts and break holes in the blockade and bring merchants through. She can fight at least any 2 capital ships by herself. She can inflict a lot of damage, but with just one of her, I don't think that's going to be a change that's going to win the Germans the war. Which version of Zuiho is better, Kansai Collection or Azure Lane? This is a bit outside my wheelhouse. But I'll have a look. Honestly, it's going to be Kansai Collection for me. The one from Azure Lane, just... I don't like it. I do not like how it looks at all. The one from Kansai Collection looks much better. YouTube, it's December 1914 and Admiral Graf Spee and friends suddenly find Scharnhorst and Gneisenau have been swapped with their World War II counterparts. What would happen next, and would they be able to get home? Well, politely, if they know how to crew them, they turn, stand, fight, and obliterate the 2 Invincibles chasing them. It's not even a contest. It's over in half an hour. You're talking about 2 modern fast battleships killing a pair of battle cruisers. If they've got full tanks of fuel, they get home. They absolutely get home. The British just fundamentally can't stop them. It's an entirely out of context problem. But what happens after that? Hard to say. Finding fuel for them after that run is going to be hard. They're actually...
HMS Tiger would like a word.
They are, like, one-on-one, they flat out thrash Tiger. Easily.
No.
Yeah, easily. Tiger's not... Yeah, they do. Tiger's not a match for the Scharnhorst.
Tiger's protected against those 11-inch guns.
No, she's not.
She is.
No, she's not. She's protected against World War I German 11-inch, not the Scharnhorst 11-inch guns. The Scharnhorst 11-inch guns will absolutely go through the belts of any of the British battlecruisers because of the increase in the different shells they use and the increase in velocity from the longer barrels of the Scharnhorst 11-inch. It's just completely different. You can't use the Force on me, Sidious. That's not how it works. Like, and the thing is, they can just, anytime they get engaged, they just crank up to 30 knots and just disappear laughing over the horizon hysterically, as the British just can't catch them. Yeah, the Scharnhorst 11-inch guns had similar ballistics and penetration to 13.5 or weaker 14-inch guns, but they delivered less punch when they actually do hit. They are, without a doubt, the best 11-inch guns that ever went to sea. Just, it's not even close. Discord question. What if the Harvesters fought the Covenant and the UNSC? Who wins? We don't know the full capability of the Harvester Empire. We don't know how many worlds they have, how many ships they have. We know what their individual assets can do, but we don't have a clue what the entire Harvester Empire is like.
The Harvesters don't have an Empire fleet.
This is what I mean.
They're nomadic.
Well, thanks.
What we see destroyed in the end of Independence Day 2 is one of the Harvesters. Virtually. Right.
Well, how many?
Right.
Well, how many do they have? Do we know? Because without knowing that, I can't make an estimate. If it's one ship, yeah, the UNSC and the Covenant can absolutely kill it. But I don't know
There's
how.
like six, right, in the Milky Way,
Is that
but
it?
they span the whole galaxy. Yeah,
Oh, well.
they're essentially transgalactic wanderers.
Oh. Well, in that case, then the UNSC and the Covenant kick their fucking ass. With aggressive, contemptuous ease. Basically. How effective would the Foreign Empire from Halo be in Star Wars? That's a bit of an out of context question. And I really don't know that much about the Foreigners.
The foreigners would kick stuff like Warhammer's ass. Like if you take the Halo books and some of the stuff they do there, and the Mastery of Slip Space, realistically, they're one tier below stuff like the Zeelyverse.
Oh, wow.
We're talking these people move star systems.
How did the Flood beat them?
Because the Flood use their own tech.
Oh.
And the Flood are the decayed corpse of a race that were close to the
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, there you are then. The Foreign Empire just wins Star Wars. There you go. That's the answer.
It depends, because if it's the Flood style, if it's the Flood era Foreigners,
Yep.
they just go cute and just sort of watch afar and invade. Sorry, different. If it's pre-Flood, they just go cute and watch from afar.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Even if it's during Flood, it's still just a bit, weird. YouTube question. How would the UK and the world respond to Stonehenge being replaced by Strangerial Stonehenge? They get the knowledge on how to use it, and what would it be used against? The UK just fundamentally tells Russia that their war in Ukraine is basically over. Because they now have the capability to just down any aircraft operating Ukrainian airspace at will. And what's Russia going to do? Launch a nuclear strike against Europe? That's not going to work. The UK is just fundamentally immune to atomic weapons. As is the rest of Europe now. So basically Europe can just go, right, the war in Ukraine is over. We are pushing you back to 2014 borders. And if you don't like it, tough shit. You don't have any recourse to stop us. It's as simple as that. It literally is that simple. That's how much of an asset you've given the UK. The Russian nuclear arsenal means nothing anymore. The Russian Air Force means nothing. You've basically just enabled European armies to go into Ukraine. No, Ruinon, I'm sorry. At that point, Europe can just go, we're removing the Russian threat forever. And denying them any victory at all.
Okay, can Stonehenge be used as an ICBM defense?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So at that point, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? Yeah, like, at that point, you just deny Russia everything it's gained. Push them all the way out of internationally recognized Ukrainian territory.
It was an adaptation of Strangefield's version of Star Wars, got massively upscaled so it could shoot down planet-killing asteroids instead of ICBMs.
Yeah.
It is shown to still be able to shoot down ICBMs.
Yeah. What do you mean regime killer, Darth Sidious? Do you mean for the Russians? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Russia will collapse.
Well, even then, it's also going to be a thing of at that point, there is no conventional war you can fight against the UK. You have to use asymmetric or, non-state actors to fight a war against the UK.
Well, you can probably fight conventionally because the UK will want to keep that option of escalation for other powers open, so they don't resort to that. But when
The
it comes
issue
to
is,
nuclear saber rattling, that's off the table.
the issue is with Stonehenge is the fact that normally it's limited firing element to anything in the stratosphere and above. It's only by literally shooting it they manage to shoot down the atmosphere.
Well,
It can't be used against ground targets.
no, it can't be used against ground targets, but it can be used against aircraft and atomic weapons, which is the things that it needs to be used against. But yeah, basically you've... Yeah, basically, Sidious, that's the thing. Russia will just be... The threat of Russia will be removed from the board. And at that point, Europe doesn't care what happens to Russia's atomic weapons. Because at that point...
No.
Oh yeah, that's right,
No,
the warheads, yeah. I keep forgetting.
Yes. That Europe is going to... Europe, and to be frank, even the US in its current context...
And China. China doesn't want
Yeah.
nuclear proliferation as well.
Well, the thing... I think what Europe and North America, broadly, would be most concerned about is those warheads or the materials that they're made out of getting into the hands of non-state actors.
At that point, honestly, if Russia collapses, the European and Ukrainian troops on the border, like the 2014 borders, they go into Russia to stabilize it. Because at that point, your other alternative is losing track of the nuclear stockpiles, and that's not an option.
I think what they do is I think you see airborne teams go in and secure those stockpiles while the country burns. I don't think you see a ground invasion and stabilization force. That's a lot of territory and a lot of people.
China will. China absolutely will make moves on Russia's eastern fleet bases, and like they'll say they're doing it to secure the nukes, but they're not actually doing it to secure the nukes.
Oh yeah, China will absolutely try.
I mean, after all, Beijing has said consistently they want Greater Manchuria back, which Russia still owns to this day. Like, they've said that numerous times. Oh, Rubinon has definitely muted, but yeah. Well, we could do that. No, Sidious, the problem isn't the fact that... The problem is that the Russian state is gone. That's the problem. In this world, the Russian state will just collapse. And at that point, you don't... Well, the problem is, Sidious, we have an option to remove the threat of Russia forever. So at that point, as Europe, we should take it. And put in the effort and the legwork to have plans in place to move on Russian nuclear storage facilities in the event of a collapse. To secure those weapons. Probably hand them over to Ukraine, actually. And this is why you don't give people massive weapon systems that can do things outside of context. Because that's what happens. So, next question. Oh, it's on top chat. No wonder I couldn't see everything. China won't do anything to expand their Timu, but they will take opportunities when they present themselves. The problem is, City, is we don't get to make that choice. We don't get to... If we take this path as the West through Stonehenge existing, we don't get to choose between whether it's regime change or collapse. That's not something we can influence. If Russia loses all the ground it's gained since 2014, that is a nation-ending event. Well, in the sense that the Russia we know, that will be a nation-ending event. Although I would be prepared for various NATO actors to actually take bits of Russia. The Finns, the Finns, the Fi-
So,
I mean, the Finns will want their pre-1940 borders back, and rightfully so.
not really. I mean, it's all Russian population. That's the issue.
True, but I mean, it belongs to Finland by right.
Because the issue with a Russian collapse is I can't see them balkanizing it. So it'll be a regime change.
Oh no, I'm not saying. I'm not
Sure.
saying what sort of collapse it'll be. Whether it'll be regime change, restructuring of the government, fundamental shift in
It'll be a
policy.
regime change. Russia doesn't really have the cultural diversity you need for a country to balkanize.
Uh,
As far as
uh,
concerned,
I hate to be that guy, Foxo, but they absolutely do.
no point. Most of the diverse areas of Russia, we're talking Tartar, and outside the Caucasus. Russia spent the last 200 years making sure that the native population are a minority.
They are, but at the same time, I would also point out the fact that there is still scope for it.
Oh, really?
I mean, there's a lot more. You're also parroting a line the Kremlin has made a lot, which is fundamentally untrue.
Not really.
You are. It's what the Kremlin wants people to think, and it's not true.
Facts don't lie. The eradication of the Tatar and Central Asian languages don't lie. The eradication of the Abkhazi language doesn't lie. The eradication of cultural identities doesn't lie.
Well,
The fact is, as most people see a Russian state as the rightful rulers in any form of the Russian people, Russia won't balkanize.
well, I think there will be some balkanization. Some groups absolutely will break away,
Yeah, it's just aside from the Caucasus.
and Central Asia as well.
Not really. All the Turkic parts of Central Asia are already gone.
Hmm.
Because let's be real, the balkanization of the Russian Empire culturally has already happened.
Hmm.
The only way it's going to go further, a lot of the Russians stop themselves as Russian, that's themselves as local cultures.
Hmm.
So, to use an English example, or to use an American example, they stop seeing them as American, they start seeing themselves as Californian
Hmm.
or New Englander. But until that happens, any change in Russia nowadays is going to fortunately change.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, don't text this gospel because I 2 bottles of Prosecco in and 4 shots of whiskey and a fire.
Fair enough. Okay, Discord question. It's 1900. Canada has decided to commit to building a competent navy wholesale. The entire population are behind it and both sides of the government. You've access to 25% of GDP permanently committed to the navy to get it off the ground and set up the nation for coming conflicts in World War I and World War II. How do you proceed and utilize the national resources at your disposal? Well, the Canadian nation is fucking gone.
They are aware that Canada fully mobilized utilized 8% of its GDP in both
Yeah.
wars, spiking to an unsustainable 11% in World War II.
Yeah. 25% just destroys the Canadian nation utterly. Unless I am getting a constant stipend from the rest of the empire to make up for. Which, even then, that's unrealistic as well. But the only way this works is if I get a constant stipend from the rest of the empire to make this happen.
Remember, kids, GDP includes stuff like agriculture, maintenance workers, and GDP, you are no longer repairing infrastructure. You're no longer building infrastructure. You are rationing.
Yeah, there is a reason why
For
Japan was on the edge of
UK
collapse.
in World War II, UK in World War II, devoted 18% in 1942 of GDP of the home rails. In 1942.
So
I'm not even sure what Canadian GDP was in 1900.
Just as a random interjection, I've never been fought over by two divisions of the same company before.
Wait, what?
Well, I'm looking for a new job.
Wait, they
I
actually
interviewed this morning.
people are fighting over you? Oh, it's good stuff.
I interviewed this morning at 9:30.
Very
By
good.
noon, I had an offer for the same pay rate I'm getting now. We'll see
Nice.
how insurance works out because that could mean my net is a little different one way or the other. I just got off the phone with the hiring manager for the other division, and he's quite accurately, which I was very open with in the interviews, like, your background is not for industry, it's for service. I'm like, yes, and they know that. Do you still want to do the interview with the service? I'm like, I'm good to do the interview with the service. Yeah.
Nice. Good stuff. Good stuff. Good stuff.
So
That's what you want.
yeah,
That's what you want. That's what you want. It's all
I mean,
good.
Always sell your skin as highly as possible.
As I said to the guy I was just talking with, it's like, service is a known quantity, but industrial is an opportunity to learn. So I just want to get out of my current job. Oh, and apparently I am deeply on my PM and foreman shit list because I'm difficult to work with.
Wow. It's almost as if the PM and the foreman are the problem. Shock horror.
Yes.
One's got less sense than a sack of potatoes. The other one is just willfully blind to what's in front of him, which makes him worse.
Team U. I would say it's gone quite well. It's just I would say it's gone quite well. So I may deafen up again to take another call.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so 25% of GDP in 1900 from Canada to build a navy. That is the problem. Like, when I said give me a percentage of GDP to build a Canadian fleet, I meant, 2%, 3%, something I could sustainably, was bigger than what they actually did, but was sustainable. 25% is just, you've almost given me unlimited funding, but you've done it in a way that cripples the economy. It just... No, Darth Sidious, no one reaches 25% GDP spending during wartime unless you are deep into a total war and you are basically burning your country down for a possible victory that you still don't think is going to come. Germany, for example, in World War II. No RBG, the UK didn't come close to 60. It was 18% in 1942 when we were spending the most. And we were basically flying solo. Yeah, Japan was one of the examples of doing it wrong. They funneled so much money into their shipbuilding and their military in the 20s, they basically had to come off the gas. It's one of the reasons why they accepted the Washington Naval Treaty the way they did. Because they couldn't keep it going. The government knew it. The Navy knew it. The Army kind of knew it. They didn't want to accept it, but the Naval Treaty gave them a convenient out. Oh, wow. Yeah, you've basically... It's not viable. And also, to be polite, I don't even know what I could buy with that. I mean, I could buy a squadron of battleships and 2 battle cruisers for each of the oceans, plus attendant cruiser and destroyer squadrons. And that's probably what I do. I'd have 4 battleships and 2 battle cruisers. Probably also adding a pair of carriers in for every 5 years. Just continuously. Along with modern flotillas of destroyers, submarines, and cruiser squadrons from 1900 through to about 1950. and then probably pare down to 4 fast battleships instead of 4 battleships and a battle cruiser in the mid 30s. But that's basically it. It's one of those things where, yeah, basically. Oh, this is a question. You are in command of a joint Galactic Republic Confederacy of Independent Systems task force tasked with removing the Hutt Syndicate. How would you go about this? Oh, that's not possible. I'm going to need a lot more than a task force for that. The Hutts are not a syndicate. They are a nation-state. They are the oldest and longest-lived independent nation-states in the galaxy. They predate the Republic, they certainly predate the Confederacy, and they are there long after the Empire has risen, fallen, warlorded. Like, the Hutts are just there. And you don't survive for that long in a galaxy like that without being exceptionally prickly.
And if I remember correctly, they actually control a large amount of space.
Yep. This is
like
not
a large territory of the map.
Yeah, this is not a mobilize a task group, let's go in. This is a full-scale, both sides have to put down their weapons and turn on the Hutts.
Yeah, it is a complete total war effort of the Hutts versus everyone else. And
to be polite, the Hutts have been stockpiling an awful lot of military assets. The Hutts have a depth of reserve capital units so large that it would make the Imperial fleet blush. And I'm talking the Imperial fleet from, the Tarkin Doctrine. And they keep building new capital ships, and then as soon as the new generation comes in, the old ones go into the reserve. And they keep doing it. And they also have some things they keep very close to their chest. They have incredibly well-trained militia and mercenaries that will fight for them. It's not viable, especially not during the Clone Wars. And even during the Imperial period, when the Empire was at its absolute zenith, the cost-benefit analysis just was not in favor of going after the Hutts. This is not a crime syndicate we're talking about. This is the oldest nation-state in the galaxy, with arguably the largest fleet in the galaxy prior to the rise of the Empire. Not to mention some things the Hutts had, technologically wise, they kept very, very close to their chest. Like, fighters with hyperdrives and shields. And bombers with hyperdrives and shields. Used en masse, and available from all of their carriers. This is the thing. The Hutts fundamentally understand that armed neutrality means armed enough that you don't fuck with us neutrality. It is armed in the sense of, you better bring your A game, otherwise you just aren't getting anything. And of course, there's also the caveat of, once you pull the trigger on the Hutts, congratulations, access to all of the Hutts' resources and vital trade lanes is gone. And of course, you've also got the thing that, all the criminal elements in your space just became incredibly active when before they were quiet and might be willing to liaise with law enforcement or not do things that might be considered a little bit off kilter. Do not fuck with the Hutts. It is a bad idea.
And from what I understand too, the Hutts are they are perfectly willing to work with people who are just willing to do business with them. As long as they're not going up against them directly, it's like they don't really care.
Yep.
Because if I remember, well, the Vong fought everyone because everyone fought the Vong because the Vong were like the Nids but could talk. to my knowledge, like the huts will tolerate a system not being under direct exacting hut control inside of hut space, so long as they are generally compliant with hut families, cartels, what have you.
Yeah. Although there are areas of hot space that are... We are the law. This is not a... Like, there is the soft power element, as Ruinon says, but there is also the... This is hut space. We patrol it, we police it, our laws. Or lack thereof.
The huts are a literal mafia.
They are a mafia, a crime syndicate, but also a nation state at the same time. It's weird.
Why the fuck I can't say the author's name without sounding racist about the Italian mafia? If organised crime becomes entrenched enough, it's its own de facto government.
Yep.
When the government collapses or becomes compromised, organised crime becomes. The huts aren't organised crime. They're just authoritarian dickheads in government.
Yep. Right, so, like I said, it would be a relatively short one this week. So what I will do is we'll bring it to an hour and a half of questions. So I'll take questions until 7 o'clock.
In other news, I'm a wizard now.
So we'll have an hour of questions from Discord and YouTube.
I just need 3 shots of fireball. Now vomiting. Which, yes.
Darth Sidious on Discord asks, what is in your opinion? And oh, actually, I'd better get StreamerBot working. If I'm gonna do that. There we go. Boot it up. Power up the laser beam. Come on, StreamerBot. There you go. Good. There we go. Right. Yes, we are doing questions. Sidious asks, what is in your
take Fleet out for dinner first.
what is in your opinion an overrated story in naval history? An overrated story in naval history. Well, that is... Oh, very quickly, I do have something to say before we dive into questions properly. Sorry, Sidious, but I need to say this. I am putting a memorandum in place. I am aware that modern politics and what's going on and modern weapon systems are of interest to people. However, we all have enough to deal with modern politics and geopolitical decisions and modern defense decisions through the news generally. It is getting a little bit grating and having to answer questions every day when the basic answer boils down to, we don't know. We don't know the capabilities of that system. I can't tell you the geopolitical decision-making that people are thinking of. I just don't know. And also, it gets a bit depressing to constantly be referred to the news, the modern news all the time. Let me finish.
We can't fucking tell you to begin with. So stop asking these questions about the classified system. Because even if we shouldn't be able to tell you.
Anyway, to politely, I'm not sure if anyone heard what she said, but even so, I'll put it in a more polite sense. Please try and keep your questions related to topics no later than the fall of the Soviet Union. So that's pre-1991, if possible. Sci-fi questions are fine, alternate history questions are fine, but from now on, and from going forwards, I don't want to see questions related to anything that happened post-1991. Simply because...
If it's military equipment after 1981, it's probably fucking classic. So why the fuck are you asking?
Okay, to clearly state what Foxo I think is trying to say, for the modern systems, no one knows the answers, and anybody who does know the answers can't tell you the answers. Especially not in this forum.
And in regards to modern politics, for the love of God, we all have enough to think about right now. I don't need reminding of it, and I really don't want to think about it. I want to go back to my comfort zone. Let me talk about ironclads.
Yes, but then you keep talking about Hosh, and that takes us out of our comfort zone. It's not all about you, Fleet. Gosh.
We don't want to talk about the flipping Hosh.
Yeah. Right. So Darth Sidious on Discord asks, what is in your opinion an overrated story in naval history? This is probably going to get me crucified, but Trafalgar.
Ooh.
Look, Trafalgar is an exceptionally important naval battle. It secures British dominance of the seas until basically the Washington Naval Treaty. However, the way in which it is focused on to the detriment of some other key engagements during the Napoleonic Wars, and some of the minor engagements that you don't hear talked about so much, is... it's overdone. It's not overrated so much, but it's overdone. It's just constantly brought up all the time. When you could talk about Russian operations in the...
Baltic?
Yeah, Russian operations in the Baltic, Ottoman operations in the Black Sea, French and Spanish operations in the Caribbean, and frigate duels that occurred worldwide, shenanigans happening in India and the Far East. There's so much navally that goes on in the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolutionary Wars that just gets overshadowed by Battle of the Nile, Battle of St. Vincent, you know...
The 7 Years' War.
Yeah. Like, there's
Jesus.
there's so many naval engagements that just get overshadowed by Nile, St. Vincent, Trafalgar.
Well, no, Trafalgar's understandable, because if Nelson fucks up badly at Trafalgar, gateway to the British Isles, so
Not really. There are even if
Ireland across the Irish Sea, wait.
Problem is, Foxo, even if Nelson is defeated, there's an equally sized fleet waiting to see what the French do. If they win, battered, then they just get jumped again. The whole thing with Trafalgar is that it's
hard enough.
Pardon?
If you fully flipped it off like the French did, then then that second fleet's going to be in the position of we're outgunned again.
Yes, but again, if Nelson can do what he did with his fleet, then it's possible that... Nelson's not the only one with the ideas that he has, by the way. There are other admirals who see that the French fight a certain way, and we can act a certain way. Like,
yeah,
it's
more of a case of... Well, Trafalgar's so important, especially in the British zeitgeist, because it's the last time any continental power has a chance of taking the British out.
They have a chance, but it's exceptionally slim. They have to win 3 more battles like Trafalgar, and the odds of that are slim.
A chance, since that hasn't been available since William the fucking Orange, and won't be available until the 1980s Americans.
Yeah.
But answer my answer, it's this carrier our American friends might have heard of, called USS Enterprise. That's it.
I think this meme I made sums it up.
For those who don't know, Pineapple whiskey is very...
I would say that if we're still on the overrated question, right?
Yeah, we are.
Any battle in World War II in the Pacific where that says that this would have knocked the U.S. out of the war. There is no battle except Pearl Harbor, maybe, if they had somehow managed to hit even harder, or they actually declared war before dropping bombs, that could have knocked the U.S. out of the war. The only thing it could have done was slow the machine, not stop it.
Okay, so
I
YouTube. Oh, sorry. Go on, Shipyard. Your turn.
Bismarck.
Well, that's come on. That's the low-hanging fruit, and you know it.
Oh, you know, I'll go for it.
So I
Fleet,
destined
I'm gonna-
myself for a phone call, but I have a
Fleet.
thermonuclear one.
Fleet, I'm
Yep.
gonna freeze Powder Monkey because there's about 5 or 6 questions that have titled up.
All right. Yeah. Sure.
No, Shipyard. That's not low hanging fruit. That's a fucking potato, mate.
Are
Okay.
we still on overrated naval stories?
Yeah. All right. Go on. Go.
Or do we want to move on? If we want to move on, we can move on. But
I thought Phoenix. You said no. You said quote thermonuclear option. So I'm sorry. You gotta. You with a
Okay.
statement like that, you gotta follow through.
so my pick for an overrated World War II story is Warspite. Now, don't get me wrong here. Warspite is definitely legendary and had a fantastic career, but at the same time, I would contend that sometimes her role gets overstated and she overshadows other ships, and a lot of actions tend to get reduced to, well, Warspite was there, so it kind of devalues the role of other ships. So, for example, like Narvik, if you look at Second Narvik when she's going in after the German destroyers, most of the work was really done by the British destroyers at the sweep ahead of her, right?
Yeah.
So she doesn't actually do that much damage to the German destroyers. A lot of what she's shooting are already wrecked ships that have been put out of action by other British destroyers.
I mean, she does obliterate.
so-
She does obliterate a few, but it's not as big of a deal as it's sometimes made out to be.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of go down the line, right? Like it's like,
Like, for example, that one ship she comes around, like, there is the quantifiable instance of she comes around the corner and just point blank obliterates a German destroyer. But
Good protest
yeah,
that
but like it's also, a beached German destroyer that has had a very rough day already.
yeah, but
So it's like obviously she really doesn't help to be gutted by 15-inch shells, but like
yeah, you've already had a bad time.
already riddled by 4.7
I don't
inch
think-
gunfire and machine guns.
Don't protect this because a lot of Narvik isn't the fact she shot destroyers; it's the fact that she went into hostile fjords as a battleship and survived.
Yes,
But that's just-
battleships
That's not
had a
something
screen
you
of
do.
like 10 destroyers, 6 of which were going ahead in front of her and clearing everything out first. That's
Yeah.
why I would consider that a little bit overrated. Like the actual, like the risk was certainly there. It just wasn't nearly as present given how much work the destroyers heading in before
I
her.
think
and
you've
her
basically
vanguard were doing.
gone for the steam and steel version of what I said. Trafalgar for the British is the Age of Sail version of what you've said for the steam and steel, which is Warspite. We've basically both gone for the nuclear options for the particular period of,
Yeah,
hitting it.
exactly. I mean, there's more examples with Warspite I could go into, but like which is again not to say that she isn't a legendary ship, and she deserves like most of her reputation. It's just sometimes you see people kind of, I feel like it's almost an overhyping of her relative to what she achieved, and I feel like it overshadows other ships.
Yeah, no, I
sometimes
completely
was
agree
present,
with
like,
that. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Can I just say to Phineas, USS Enterprise was my pick for the same reason as Phoenix picked Warspite.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, she's a fantastic carrier, she does good work, but there are times when a campaign or a battle can be boiled down to just her when there's so much more involved.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Enterprise, especially when you get to the latter part of the war where she's just, she's the surviving Yorktown running around, and that's all nice and well and such, and, she gives a good account of herself, but, there's also the Essex Tide.
All of the Essexes. I'm sorry. Would Sir like an Essex with that?
Even if she had failed, it wouldn't have changed the course of the war.
I mean, well, to be fair with Enterprise, right, like, there is certainly an aspect of, Enterprise versus Japan in, like, 1942 and part of 43, where she's sort of the only real U.S. fleet carrier running around. Well, not the only one, but also the only one that isn't constantly being put out of action.
Yeah.
So there is a degree to which, in terms of keeping the war a little bit shorter and, preventing a lot of lives lost, she's definitely plays an important role there, and like arguably, I'd say, like, if you're going to compare like across navies, like a probably a more pivotal role than like say Warspite did for the Royal Navy, where you're kind of hard pressed to pick any one action where Warspite, like, had she not been there, it would have really set back the Royal Navy, for example. Really hard to come up with examples of that, but with Enterprise, you could probably make a more concrete argument on that account. But that's also, I think, partly in nature of just how many carriers are around versus battleships, and just how highly lethal carrier warfare was in general too. I mean, like, I always raise the point that, like, both the U.S. and Japan went into 1942 with 6 fleet carriers roughly, and both of them lost 2/3 of those fleet carriers by the end of the year. And that's not even accounting for other fleet carriers taken out of action from damage.
Like, this is the thing that people say, oh, Midway was a turning point, etc. I'm saying, you do realise the Japanese during 42, prior to Guadalcanal, were giving as good as they were getting. Midway is not sweeping the balance, it's just the US actually scoring even again.
Yeah, well, Midway restored the balance, I would say. It's probably the best way to put it. It put the US in a position where they were back in the game for 42, where they could fight the Japanese on even terms, as opposed to just being purely on the back foot, which would have been the case had Midway not been successful, or even worse, if the U.S. had been roundly defeated at Midway. They would have been on the back foot for the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, next question. Admiral Wellesley on Discord asks, if you were to be the Japanese delegation to the Washington Naval Conference, how would you negotiate it to favour the IGN more than our timeline? I fundamentally cannot. I cannot do anything that the Japanese did not already try. The Japanese came out of... They entered Washington as, well, the Japanese Navy was considered a threat, but it wasn't considered on certain people's radar as equivalent to the West. They exit the Washington Naval Treaty as above France, Italy, Germany, Russia. There is Britain and America, and then there is Japan. And Japan is as far ahead of the others as Britain and America are to them.
Yeah, and I think Japan, there's actually a really strong argument that Japan won the Washington Naval Treaty more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even though they were aiming for that 70% tonnage limit relative to the British and the Americans, that was never super realistic, and even being negotiated down to 60%, that still put a cap on the British and the Americans that the Japanese, even if the Japanese, if those caps had not been there, either of those powers could have far more easily outbuilt the Japanese beyond that 60% ratio, right?
Yeah.
So the Japanese, in a lot of ways, really won by locking the Americans and British in at that ratio. And furthermore, the clauses relating to fortifications in the Western Pacific
that was a huge win.
Heavily favored Japan.
So that was a massive win. Yeah. That was
something that the U.S. Navy, when it was doing its war games in the 1920s and 30s, trying to figure out how do we fight a Pacific war against Japan, that was something that was very difficult for them to wrestle with, and that's one of the big reasons why they just had to wholesale move to a system of, okay, we're going to do methodical amphibious assaults against various Japanese holdings. We're not just going to bum rush across the Pacific with the U.S. Pacific Fleet, because we will simply be attrited away, and even if we win when we get there, we will have no capacity to repair our ships. And our battle fleet will basically be a non-entity, a non-operable entity once it gets over to the Philippines, assuming we're not defeated.
Yeah.
So and granted, this is often like the big thing that kind of glosses over this in history, or causes to be glossed over in history, is the fact that the Japanese were so adamant on the 70%, and the younger generation of Japanese officers saw it as such a betrayal, right? But it really was a win, and the older generation of Japanese officers who were in charge of the Japanese Navy at that point in time when the treaty was being negotiated saw it as an absolute win. It was just something that they could never convince the younger generation of.
Mm-hmm. Next question is a YouTube question. Timu Locker asks, if Small Fleet would have been born in a galaxy far, far away and found being rebellious in nature, what would his dream posting have been in Rebel Forces? Politely, give me an MC-80 Home 1 and a fleet around me, and I'll go have fun battering down Imperial outposts in the Outer Rim. That's what I want to do. I don't want to get tangled up in Endor and all the major events. I want to have myself a small task group that's entirely mine, and I want to go and bash, Imperials over the head. That's what I want to do. That to me is what I would want to do. Not all the MC80 home ones were actually at Endor. A lot were, but not all of them. Like, Endor was the majority of the Alliance fleet, not all of it. Oh, that was quick. Anyone else? Well, rest of the panel, what's your dream postings in the Rebel Alliance then? If you want to come serve with me, I'll give you a frigate. You know, you can all have Nebulon Bs. You can all be my escorts.
I don't know,
I'd rather
honestly.
go on the Empire.
Oh,
Really?
well,
Look,
there is an answer.
signals opposite. Look, tell you what, James. If I give you a let me see. You were on frigates, weren't you? In the Royal Navy. If I give
No, it's the
you,
aircraft carrier.
oh, I'll tell you what. I'll give you a. Yeah, I know what I'll do. Hey, I'm giving you the. Oh, for God's sake, what's it called? I'm giving you the Quasar. You get the Quasar, and all the X-wings. You get the Quasar, and all of the X-wings. I'll give Phoenix a Nebulon B electronic warfare fit. He can do all the funny.
Fun.
He can do all of the funny.
Can I just
The
be
jamming.
hiding out on the flight line with a wrench in my hand?
No, you're
Ruin.
no, you're on the.
Join me in intelligence.
No, ruin.
Infiltrating Imperial planet.
Oh no.
To be document to the rebels.
Oh no, Foxo is my sneaky leader of my commando unit, and Ruinon is the captain of the fleet's repair ship.
I don't know that. Please,
It is
put my life on the line
acceptable.
for you. Me put my life on the line for you. I'm the woman that's someone's secretary giving you reports on fleet movements of the local Imperial garrison. That's
Yeah.
as much as I do for this fucking rebellion.
Oh God! What a motley crew we are. We've got an MC80 Home 1, a bunch of I'll give Moe a wing of CR90s as the main screen.
I'll
Nah.
be a rebel shock trooper.
Oh yeah, Moe's the leader of the Rebel Shock Troops. Yeah, do it. Well, no, serious. I'm not like high up. I'm task group commander of this little flotilla, but I'm not much more than that. Like, I've got the X-wings, the A-wings, and the Y-wings, and then James is sat there with like a pair of CR90s and his Quasar Fire going. I'm gonna throw X-wings at stuff because he can.
Yeah, so I'm not going to actually be a combat because I've got a massive weakness to my loyalty, the whole my dragon. That if the Imperials find out about him, I'm dying for you. He's not dying for you. I tell you, the Imperials, where the fuck you are.
Well, what if I protect Dragon with my fleet? What then?
You actually dragon would join the rebels.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Dragon would probably be on the opposite side, staring me down with an Allegiance class Star Destroyer, and all of the TIE fighters.
Eight?
So basically, you'd have like the rest of the galaxy would be peaceful, and everyone else would be like, well, what happened to that MC80 and its fleet and the Allegiance that went after it? And literally, like they come out to the outer rim and they find like two little mini kingdoms with with two rebel and Imperial task group leaders just constantly throwing stuff at each other. Oh.
Wellesley, did
I would be
you
an
do
Empire
something?
racing.
Did your crew did something to offend you?
What did you say, James?
You know I am more Empire than Rebel, right?
Oh, don't you
But the Empire
don't
wasn't.
don't
The
you
Rebels are terrorists.
don't you dare
Join us.
don't you dare
Join
take
us. We
the
have
Quasar
cookies.
Fire and go and join Dragon.
We
I
have
swear.
cookies.
Don't you dare.
Yeah. All the gubbins.
It's fine.
Give you
I
the
have-
word of a mock.
I have X-wings and Y-wings and an MC-80
Y-wings.
Home 1. And
But we at the Empire have health insurance.
you do realise you won't be able to find us. Phoenix will be jamming your sensors 7 ways from Sunday. You won't see us through the electronic noise he will generate.
Yeah, exactly. And good luck trying to file for your insurance claims when I'm jamming all your stuff. You'll never see the light of day on that.
But fleet that makes you really easy to find. Because if you look at the space, you look at the place where there's a lot of jamming, there's a good chance.
What? Jamming does not have to be loud. We have the technologies.
We have the fucking
Like,
technology.
How do you, okay, let me put it like this. How do you think you can use a 5th generation stealth aircraft nowadays, like an F-35, and have it effectively do electronic attack without unveiling itself, given it is a stealth platform? There are ways to do this with low probability of intercept for your signals. So I'm just saying.
I just thought that was the fact that it tells you where the F-35 is, but it doesn't give you a precise enough location to target it.
Ah.
So you've still got that
Kind of.
gap in the
It
actual
gets
Hang on,
complicated.
gentlemen, we're getting a little bit. I know. I'd like. Please, can we?
It's relevant to the 70s air combat, where you got the fact is, I remember because it was one of the nuclear test exercises
Nuclear
with the
test.
Vulcans, where it was the Vulcans jamming equipment told the US Air Force participants where the aircraft were generally, but it stopped them getting lock on the.
I mean, what I basically need to avoid, well, what both sides are basically looking to avoid is, well, no, Brandon, it's the Rebel Alliance. We ain't got K-Wings. We get B-Wings if we're lucky. I'll probably prefer...
Yeah, K-Wings are a post-war deployment.
Also, politely, given where we're going to be operating, I want X-Wings and Y-Wings, and probably, actually, I also want a few squadrons of Z-95s. Just given we're going to be far away from supply lines. Z-95...
Why do you want headhunters and not K-Wings? If you could get a K-Wing, why would you not want the K-Wing?
Well, no, if I can get a K-Wing, I'll have a K-Wing. But given where we're going to be operating, like in the outer rim, knocking down warlords... Not warlords, sorry. Imperial outposts on the rim. I'm gonna, like, yes, I'll have X-Wings and stuff, and Y-Wings. Y-Wing parts are fairly easy to come by, so are Z-95 parts. But I'm gonna want to husband my X-Wings basically purely for, you know, fighting enemy TIEs. If I'm not dealing with TIE fighters, I'm gonna be deploying the Z-95s. Brandon Larson, Thrawn. It's Thrawn. I'm sorry, it's just Thrawn. I ain't fighting Thrawn. If I see Thrawn coming out of hyperspace, I'm gone. That's it. Good night, Vienna. We're going. But like Phoenix, turn the jamming up to 11. We're going. We're gone. That's it. We're done. We're out of here.
If you could jump Thrawn, you could maybe win. But the more time Thrawn has to evaluate you, you are boned. Giga-boned.
The thing, how you analyze how you deal with Thrawn is that you make sure you have a good enough intelligence network to know where he is roughly at all times, and you just be anywhere but that. Be anywhere that he cannot easily, if he does slip the noose on you, right, and you don't know exactly where he is, he can't get to there within half a week or something like that. That way you give yourself enough time to go to ground and get the hell out of there. I'd prefer just not take on Thrawn.
Yeah, I don't want to take on Thrawn. Oh boy.
You join him.
I ain't doing that. Ooh, actually, hang on. I suppose if I say we're from another world, and I could say X, Y, Z, like I know you're only serving the Empire for these reasons. I know this, like etc. etc. That could work.
Yeah, but Thrawn's cool. Thrawn. Oh my god, English hard, bad. English. I can't even England.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Like I can't even England sometimes as well. Right. So, well, that was a question that was a much deeper dive than I expected. That opened a rabbit hole, didn't it?
Was just
Also, I'm going to just put this out there that I have a soft spot for the K-Wing. For some weird and bizarre reason, I have a soft spot for the K-Wing. And the fact that they replaced it with the Star Fortress or whatever the heck they called it
We don't talk about it. Ruben, I didn't happen.
is a
Doesn't exist.
tragedy.
Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. Don't talk about it. Never happened. That's what we're talking about.
We don't talk about it.
Never
I'm
happened.
actually not familiar with the K-Wing, and I assume it is not a reference to, like, Korean wings.
No, it is not. Right, so the next question is Admiral Wellesley asks a question he's asked a few times before, but our answer will still be the same. Admiral Wellesley says, would you and the panel ever consider doing a redo of the Washington Naval Conference, aka each panel member represents a nation, sometimes two represent a single party, and you renegotiate the Washington Naval Treaty? It doesn't work. The problem you have is that everyone knows how the Washington Naval Treaty turned out. No one has any stakes in it above just trying to win, and it would lead to outcomes that would fundamentally make zero sense. You can't.
Right, try one in Hoy.
The thing, you can't without stakes behind it. You can't really do it. That's the unfortunate thing of it. You can't really do it without stakes.
What, T-bone steaks?
Seneca Nero asks, how would you use HMS Leviathan, presumably referencing Drax' 100-year-old Great Eastern that serves the Royal Navy, in the Falklands in the Falklands and forwards? Simple. I wouldn't. Politely, the fact that she lasted as long as she did was a miracle. And by the time of the Falklands War, she's old, slow, and in the politest possible sense, of no real use to me. I would do what Drac did: put her in the Thames, have her be the Belfast replacement, and she would not go to the Falklands. Simple as that.
Too slow for the Falklands?
She manages 24 knots on a good day with a following wind.
Faster than half the RFAs.
Yeah, the problem is she can't operate Harriers.
You can
Yeah,
make
but
her
she
do it.
could operate a bunch of helicopters.
Problem is her machinery was already beginning to wear when World War II starts. By the time it ends, yeah. No.
This is ship we need to add to the Red Fleet timeline.
The Red Fleet timeline is over. I am not returning to it. That ship has sailed. I am done. I don't want to think about it anymore. I already had my designs destroyed. Don't need to do that again.
Sorry.
No. I'm fine, honestly, it's fine. I'm playing it up for the laughs.
Good.
Just saying. Leviathan as an LHA would be a pretty interesting concept.
So, next question is... Brandon Larson asks, what if a conventional non-nuclear war was fought in the 60s and in the 60s to the 70s between the West and Warsaw Pact? Who would have won in the end? The war, if it's fully conventional, I'm sorry, prior to the 80s, the Warsaw Pact wins. It just, yeah, it is.
Balance of forces really does favor them, yes.
Like, and you don't
Air
have
to ground capabilities are not that good yet to really swing that in favor of the Allies. Like, there's very much a reason why deterrent strategy in the Cold War was us threatening to nuke the Soviets first if they did something, if they made a threatening penetration, because there was just no other easy way to contain them.
It's not until you get to the 80s.
Not to say that the Soviet offensive plans, the ones they did drop, did not also call for using nuclear weapons against the West, anyways. But it's one of those things where this is something we had to threaten throughout the entire Cold War. And it was a case of, obviously our strategy, exactly how we did this, adjusted over time. I think about like going from McNamara's more assured destruction, minimal deterrent strategies in the 50s and 60s and 70s versus, countervailing strategy that gets introduced in the late 1970s by the Carter administration and kind of goes on to a more counterforce direction from there on to the 1980s and to today, really.
Yeah.
That's the bedrock of extended deterrence. But yeah, it's just the Soviets just had far more mass in the field to throw at the Allies, or
Like
the NATO allies, and
Britain, Denmark, and Norway, you could probably save in a purely conventional war in the 60s and between the 60s and the 70s. You could save them. But the Reds are probably rolling all the way to the French border and maybe even all the way to the Channel.
I don't think Denmark would have survived, to be honest. I forget
Yeah.
if the polls were because because I know people always focus on the Fulda Gap, but like from what we know of the actual Soviet plans, essentially the big thing was there was going to be a large push of East German and Polish forces that were going to go through northern Germany, and the whole idea was isolate Denmark, punch through. I believe it was the Belgians specifically because they're part of the line because they considered the weakest part of the line, simply because the smallest army, and also it's a dividing point between other armies. It's just the Soviets always felt that the easiest points to penetrate would always be the dividing lines between various NATO armed forces of different nationalities, as opposed to going straight through the middle of, say, the Germans or the Americans or whatever, right? And the idea was to basically take Antwerp, cut NATO forces in half, and deny them the ability to be easily resupplied through the largest ports available in Northern Europe. So Denmark would have been like entirely cut off by that point, and it would have not been pretty for them. And that's the thing is, like, they were going to do this, and this would have not even required Soviet troops initially, which is always the problem with the USSR, right? Because you do have all these, for the Warsaw Pact, you have all these Eastern European states, and they're quite large armed forces that could be thrown at first before the Soviets ever arrived. In fact, some of the Soviet plans, again, it doesn't really work for our scenario because we're trying to keep it strictly conventional, but essentially the idea was, we will use these forces to overwhelm the initial forces in Europe, so the Europeans and the American forces on the line, right? And then when the Americans start getting reinforcements to Europe and they start counterattacking, then we just start dropping tactical nukes along the entire line. Yes, we will kill lots of our own Eastern Europeans, actual allies, but they are a sacrifice we are willing to make. And then we'll mop up with the Russian troops, USSR troops, for the fact, and that'll allow us to push all the way through to the to the Atlantic. But it is one of those things where it is genuinely quite hard to separate weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear and chemical, from Cold War gone hot, because it was just such a major part of everybody's fighting doctrine.
Yep.
But
going off that slight tangent and that slight topic, realistic would you say Red Storm Rising is?
Red Storm Rising, it's been a while since I've read the book, so I'm
the flashpoint
not
for the
100%.
conflict. I can understand. I don't think it's quite that realistic in terms of the flashpoint. The combat itself is okay. The whole thing with the Russians going after convoys is just complete bollocks. That's not what the Red Fleet.
Strategy.
Yeah, the whole point is you defend because the Russians quite well knew that if a conflict stayed conventional, the sides would have the stocks they had in Europe plus possibly the earliest parts of Reforger to fight the war with. And whoever either achieved their objectives or ran out of supplies first would be the winner or the loser, respectively. So it fundamentally didn't matter that they went after convoys or not, because the war would be over before they could realistically affect the outcome.
Yeah, and the big thing also was the main bulk of Soviet anti-shipping capacity was there to effectively defend the Soviet SSBN bastions, right? And likewise, by the 80s, the NATO idea of how to fight this war, particularly in regards to the Americans, essentially was pushing up around the Kola Peninsula to threaten that, and to push and basically to lure out the Soviet bomber force to destroy it. And that's the whole basis of outer air battle and such. right? But that would have been essentially trying to push all the major combat north of the GI-UK gap. So you'd be doing ASW sweeping, was a big part of the British mission, for example. But the main thing would basically be the carriers sending up the long range fighters, the F-14s, to try and kill Soviet bombers, while you rely on the screening destroyers, the Aegis ships, to be soaking up the mass launches of Kh-22s, should they be launched. But the whole idea was effectively to just take the Soviet bomber, that huge Soviet bomber fleet, out of the equation, because they could do a ton of damage if they were used just in terms of striking targets in Europe, likewise the Mediterranean, and ideally, if you do get around the northern flank, you can start really you contain the Soviet Navy, but also you really start to threaten their the deterrent, and put pressure on them in that regard. And maybe convince them to not try and go escalate the war further. But still, to be fair, the whole new maritime strategy was kind of open-ended in that regard. So they weren't the U.S. Navy knew they wanted to get up there. They weren't entirely sure what they were going to do when they were up there, though.
Basically,
cool.
Yep. That's the long and the short of
it. There are some crazier strategies, like ideas about hey, what if we do amphibious landings here? And I don't think anybody ever got too far with those concepts because they were a little bit out there. I mean, granted, there would still have probably been some kind of amphibious action up in the northern parts of Norway, simply because the Soviets would have probably attacked into there, and thus you would have had clashes between them and the Norwegians and the Royal Marines and the Americans. But yeah.
Sound.
So, Seneca Nero asks, how do you think Bletchley Park would react if someone came to the front gate with a modern laptop? The problem is that's such an out of context moment.
What is a PDF?
Yeah, it's also too far ahead for them to actually adapt. If you'd have brought a computer back from the 50s, they could have made actual use of it and made adaptations. But a modern laptop uses things that are just fundamentally impossible to replicate or reverse engineer.
The bigger problem, Fleet, is that unless you or the individual bringing this program back has either loaded, or bringing this laptop back, has either loaded it with hack and crack programs or is a programmer themselves, they are not going to have any idea how to adapt that hardware to crack Enigma, Japanese signals, Italian signals. So it's going to be neat, but they're not going to be able to really learn much from it.
You forget something that's even worse from this situation. Most laptops nowadays have multi-core processors.
That's
yes, but if you
Without
don't know how to
power conversion software, good luck trying to get a multi-core computer to crack that sort of encryption. Because you're running into the same issue while the trip do. And that is you waste time going in circles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a case of, I'll put it this way, all electronic chips now for the past 20 years are made through robotics. I know I do chip replacement. During chip replacement, you are at the physical limit of what body can reliably do at that stage. So once you go down to the chip level, they're going to have no fucking clue. Because quite frankly, most people struggle to understand chips of that scale. It's the reason why people nowadays get paid so fucking much for it.
Mm-hmm. Basically.
Modern computers are more analogous to magic than, say, modern nuclear weapons to people at this time. understanding the human brain in the 1940s than a modern computer in the 1940s. Aside from, actually, that's a bad example because I'm trying to get human brains gone backwards because we think of it as a binary computer, and the brain's not a binary computer. That's
Mm.
the bad. So, actually, yes.
Yes. Yes. Someone said my name.
Did you get anything what I just said?
A little bit.
Every kind of other word.
Yeah, your mic quality has kind of.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well.
Dive
But
into a toilet.
essentially, modern computers, black magic, to 1940s or even 1970s fountains. More black magic than the human brain.
Open it up. Hey, got a word the gears. This isn't any computer I know.
I agree that from an engineering perspective, it's going to be absolutely useless.
Mm-hmm.
However, if the person bringing it back knows how to write code, the British will be ahead in code breaking for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Harry, the issue with that is, okay, you can write code for the new device. How the fuck do you write code for the devices it's running off? Because I don't know about you, but computers don't come with the ability to translate raw radio signals nowadays. Nor do they come with the ability of programming to, say, take Morse code.
Well, no, they don't. But you would be doing manual data entry into the program to unfuck the toaster. You know, just like you did with the computer that was built at Bletchley to crack Enigma.
Because the big thing with Bletchley Park that made it so fucking scary is it's one of the first computers where you didn't have input manual. They could directly take the inputs from the receiver and directly mechanically translate it for the computer. There wasn't a human involved by 91.
So Seneca over on Discord is saying essentially, assume it has the ability to ingest radio signals and assume it is preloaded with code-breaking software and blueprints for computers. Blueprints for computers, you might start seeing some very, very coarse node integrated circuit stuff in 10 years' time, maybe, possibly, if they
you're
invest
lucky.
a tremendous amount of money into it.
If you're lucky.
Does it come with basic robotics knowledge? If it comes with basic robotics knowledge, I agree with you. If it lacks robotics, even the basic industrial robotics, no. You're working on too fine a scale.
However, with those first two items, then yeah, Bletchley Park runs the board until there's a brownout in the grid and it fries the computer. Because one thing that we take for granted nowadays is modern wall power is very, very clean.
Actually, if it's sort of the European Union, a brownout won't fuck it over. Computers in the UK have regulator bricks and power cable, which specifically stop that.
Yes, we do too.
And act as a circuit breaker that protects the power switch.
But if you undervolt that transformer enough, that AC to DC transformer enough, eventually you will cook it.
Theoretically, constant levels of power generation is possible. I don't know if you want to see back in this time. Because you've got to remember that by this point you've got the national grid. That's constant 24 volts, I think. Well, parts of the national capital, they get taken down. But stuff like Bletchley Park, I think, were on their own power network with their own generation, so it should be fine.
All right, shall we kick on to the next one? 'Cause
Yeah,
think
I
we'll
am.
beat this
I am.
one
I
to
am.
death.
I am going to very quickly touch on something. Wellesley, in regards to why I'm not.
Me and
in reg-
Rui get too technical
Yeah,
for rambling
in regard
very quickly with this topic.
in regards for why I'm not touching your question on getting the racial equality proposal through the 1919 Paris Peace Conference, simply because I just don't want to touch that. The topic will get incredibly detailed and incredibly gritty exceptionally quickly, and it's just I'm not doing it. It's even though it's been 106 years since that was attempted, I'm just not touching it. I'm not touching that. It's no, not doing it. That's why I'm not touching that question.
I think it was one of the health touching. Consider that at the time, stuff like Jim Crow happened after this. The expansion of indentured servitude in India happened after this.
We're not touching it. Like that's all she's gonna say
Yeah.
on that. We're not touching it. It's not.
Sort of. This is a June level mega can of worms. Don't touch it.
Yeah.
This may drag. But we can. We can go
Right.
through that in a lot more casual.
So.
Movies with one.
Yes. Thank you, James. That was excellently timed. Brandon Larson asks a variation on a question we've already had. What if the Covenant fought the Harvesters from Independence Day? Who would win a full-scale war? The Covenant, aggressively easily. They can glass planets. The planet-sized starships of the Harvesters are going to be easy prey. It's not even funny. The Covenant just win. It's really that easy. I'm sure the people than Seneca Nero asked questions. Oh no, it was just Seneca Nero. So Seneca Nero, mast timbers are one of the now overlooked scarce resources of the Age of Sail. What would an example for that be in the Ironclad era? Skilled sailors. It took a very long time for nations to realize that the paradigm for operating a world-class navy had fundamentally changed. If in each navy, it takes a while before they realized, no, you cannot just drag sailors off the pier side anymore. The skills needed to operate the latest and greatest warships are not what merchant sailors have anymore. It took the Russians until the aftermath of the Russo-Japanese War to get the message. For the French, their watershed moment was the Franco-Prussian War. The British didn't really have one because the British were already more industrially minded, and their merchant fleet gained steam propulsion much quicker than everyone else's did. Like, the proliferation of steamships through the British merchant marine was aggressively faster than most of the rest of the world's. So they were a little bit more resistant to it. But that is the equivalent of things like mast timbers in the Age of the Ironclad. It is skilled sailors who understand how to operate machinery, or at least the very basics of how machinery works. Anyone else got anything they want to say?
I think you've nailed it on the head, mate.
Wow, that's a rarity. Strike that off the bingo card.
What's the question?
Basically, mast timbers were the things in short supply by the end of the Age of Sail, or an example of a thing that was always in short supply during the Age of Sail. What's the equivalent in the thing that people didn't think about, but was actually in short supply when you would really need it during the Ironclad era? And it's trained sailors. What?
Yeah, these are always short of tar.
Yes, but not. It's not the same thing as, like, Like, you can't operate your navy with it.
I'd also say that there's a certain aspect of how much funding do you have to be at sea to train your personnel as well. I think is also important.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
this
not
is
like
an era when like it's very common for ships to just like be completed in technic, like they exist, but they're actually like decommissioned or in reserve, not actively manned, not actively going to sea. So it's great you have the ship on paper, but if the ship is not being actually like manned and going to sea and doing gunnery exercises, right? That ship is basically it has no combat value, and whenever a crew does go aboard, they have to then work up the ship to be ready for action. So you really your navy is constantly going to be a deficit of not just trained seamen, but also those trained to perform on a military ship and do things like perform gunnery roles and such, right? If they're simply not at sea exercising because you don't have the funds to have those ships manned at all times, or not at all times, but manned on a regular basis. Which relates to the whole overall question of how much the overall answer of just how much trained manpower do you have, but it's also just a case of also just money.
Yeah, this is the thing.
Time at sea was why the Royal Navy was keeping punches well above its weight in weight. So like a lot of fleets, it did spend a lot of time at sea in training.
Hmm. I mean, it's one of the fundamental lessons the Russian fleet learned. Like, there's a reason why, when you look at the Russian Navy post Tsushima, every single fleet has a core of career, well-paid sailors. Not officers and NCOs, sailors. And the Russians maintained that up until the collapse of the Imperial fleet. Which for them was fairly, impressive. Given Imperial Russia sometimes has a less than stellar record on keeping things together that it needs to keep together. Right, let me see. Last question. I'm gonna skip that one because that is just I have no idea how to answer that. That would have to be a dragon question. Admiral Wellesley. Okay. Admiral Wellesley asks, how long can the USM be placed on the back foot in the Second World War? The Japanese basically have to keep rolling natural 20s. Suffer no losses and keep hitting the US. If they keep doing this, they've got until the Essex Swarm arrives in strength. Then at that point, the US will just deliver a sledgehammer blow. It's going to cost the US a ton of... It's going to cost the US carriers to do it, but by the end of whatever battle that is, the US will be down like 3/4 of the carriers they started the battle with, but the IGN's pride of the carrier fleet will just be gone.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would put it, right, is, I mean, you think about, like, it's pretty easy to imagine, like, let's say Midway had gone very heavily in favor of the Japanese, and thus skewed the balance of power for the later campaigns of 1942. One thing when the Essex tide does start to arrive, like, you don't actually get ships operational and not carriers operational in numbers really until the later part of 1943. So Essex herself is not just date of completion, but actual operational date, right? Essex is May of 43. Yorktown is July of 43. Intrepid is December. Ticonderoga, August 43. Lexington, August 43. Bunker Hill, September 1943, right? And then, from that point on, you're in 1944. So really, if the Americans are put on the back foot in 42, like I said, there's no Midway moment or Midway goes horribly, they're really not going to get those reinforcements and carriers until that they can actually field the numbers until like 43. And I say field the numbers because the big thing is you don't really want to be feeding the Japanese one or two carriers at a time, because if the Japanese still have the bulk of their carrier force, then you're setting yourself up to be on the receiving end of being outnumbered. The odds
and they'll be adding to it as well.
More scouting aircraft.
Yeah.
And I think that, combined with the fact that ultimately the Allied strategy was still Germany first, you would have a more passive America in the Pacific until 43, until the latter part of 43, and we would just have probably focused more effort on clearing up the Axis in Europe first, as was always already the case. But it would just probably have been more resources would have flown to that because it would have taken longer for us to be on the rolling offensive in the Pacific. Now the interesting thing there is going to be that Japan is not going to significantly grow in strength regardless of this breathing period.
No.
So to a certain extent, the submarine force will still attrit them when the submarines start being effective for the U.S. Navy, right? And then the Pacific offensives will start up later. Like you can talk about like a year delay or so. But once you get to the later stages of the campaign, well, for one, you're gonna have nuclear weapons available earlier relative to the American progress through the Pacific. It's kind of the big thing. Also, I could potentially see the British Pacific Fleet taking a larger role in the Pacific than did historically, simply because the British presumably will not be so heavily affected by this. If assuming the war in Europe wraps up on an earlier timeline, then that's basically a whole extra year that the British Pacific Fleet will be in the Pacific while the Japanese are still at war. So that could also have some interesting implications as well. Just thinking through it now, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like the Japanese can basically keep the US on the back foot till 43. But like I said at the start, there will come a point where the US will the Philippines, think the Philippine Sea, but on steroids. Like you're talking like that. It will be the bloodiest carrier battle that will likely ever be fought. You're talking at least 12 Essex-class aircraft carriers, ideally, versus the Kinabutai, plus Taiho, plus the seaplane carrier conversions, plus whatever rapid light carriers they can get, plus whatever of the unreused they may or may not have managed to get into service. And those carriers will have fairly decently trained Japanese aviators on them. You're talking about a battle that the US will win, but it is still gonna sting. I mean, the Japanese carrier fleet will just be done by the end of it, but the US is gonna take losses.
Yeah, and it's also a question of, how many of the same lessons does the U.S. Navy learn if it doesn't have all the same combat experiences in 42 as well?
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, also, if assuming, again, if we're running with the assumption of, let's say, the U.S. loses at Midway or something like that, then you're talking about what? I mean, you could end up in a situation where you have a lot less experienced personnel going back to train the new generation of American fighter pilots too.
Yeah.
Is also a concern. I mean, the Americans obviously did have a good system of rotation to do that, but that's also, they simply were not taking nearly as horrendous losses in terms of carrier pilots in the first place. So this could also have an impact on that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was a nice, neat way to cap things off. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Hope you've all enjoyed. Thank you, Ruinon, for being here. Thank you, Richelle here. Thank you, Phoenix, as always. Thank you, James. Always a pleasure to have James here. Thank you, Yomoe Waifu, as always. And thank you, Foxo. I hope you've all...
YouTube, be sure to smash that like button.
Honestly, please,
Subscribe.
please.
Like it owes you money.
Please do. We've been hovering around 320, between 320 and 325 subscribers for ages now. Can we try and break 350, please? Pretty please. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Tell everybody. Please. Pretty please. With the cherry on top.